So I think the ground rules, we get a 10-minute pitch from each group with 15 minutes of follow-up Q&A. So without further ado, where's the orange team? Team Orange, right here. All right. Well, let's welcome them.
So the university, but
Timer? Is there? Oh, she's pulling up a timer. Okay.
I think I'm under, like, I'm literally learning the role after you guys know. So should we not say I don't think we're supposed to know what university you're about.
That's right. All right, good afternoon. We're excited to present to you Team Orange, or Team FreightFlex's solution to the 2019 FreightTech Innovation Challenge. Before we begin, we'd like to briefly introduce ourselves.
I'm Kaya de Adeni.
I'm Lindsay Eads.
I'm Sahil Sheth.
I'm Erin Flynn.
I'm Noé Alonso.
I'm Andre Salas.
So to get started, over the past 18 hours, we have analyzed the company Ben Murphy and Daughters and the expansion of growth they've experienced in the Southeast and the challenges associated with that expansion of growth. Our qualitative analysis shows that a key factor in association with this is flexibility. There are two components to flexibility that we understand. One is resource adaptability, and two is technological innovation, investment, and efficiency. Now, why is flexibility important? There are a number of reasons. First, there's a dynamic business environment that Ben Murphy and Daughters operates in. Two, there's an unsettled future in terms of the industry they operate in because of technology. There's an uncertainty about what's going to be on the frontier in the next 5 years. A couple of other factors are there's a low-cost investment in the short term by remaining flexible. And finally, it allows you to diversify your risk by remaining flexible. And we'll get into how we're doing this specifically in a minute. In terms of resource adaptability, there are two ways we're going about this. First, we're reorganizing our network. So we're going to add a port, and then we're going to focus on 2 warehouses. And again, we'll discuss this in a second. And then we're also reimagining our PP&E strategy. And the way we're doing this is, 1, by supplementing our fleet through outsourcing, and 2, renting our warehouses. So to talk more about this first step and reorganize our network, I'm going to pass it on to Lindsay.
Thank you. All right. So if we can just go to the next slide, I'm going to quickly talk about our current state so I can compare that to our future state and see what we are implementing. So we are currently doing manufacturing in Shanghai, and we are importing to the U.S. through the Charleston, South Carolina port, and then to our warehouse in Atlanta. We currently have 7 contracts signed throughout the Southeast, and we also are seeing an increase in demand in Dallas and Youngstown, Ohio. So for our future, we are planning on getting rid of our Atlanta, Georgia warehouse. This is due to the high traffic in that area. We are finding it hard to get the truck out in time, and it increases our time there. So instead, we will be having our warehouses in Birmingham, Alabama, and Toledo, Ohio. Those locations will go into detail why we chose those, but we chose to do 2 because we will have large enough warehouse. We found that we would still be able to reach the current demands, and having a low initial capital investment allows us to continue to make advancements while demand increases and helps us in the long term. We also will be going to the ports. We're going to add to Virginia. This just allows more options for us and more flexibility And we'll go again later into that more in detail. So just to give us an idea of our product flow now, we will be coming from Shanghai to the 2 different ports now in Virginia and Charleston. The Virginia port will go right to our Toledo warehouse, and the Charleston will go directly to our Birmingham and then to our end consumer. I will now pass it on, and he will talk about our assumptions.
Thank you, Lindsay. After studying the case, we came to a few assumptions. First of all, the current fleet is at full capacity. And while looking at the supply chain, we noticed that we have to continue outsourcing, sourcing from Shanghai, and then we have guaranteed buyers for our Atlanta's warehouse. Also, we have some technological problems while studying the case. We noticed that there isn't enough tracking technology for the trucks, as well as data technology. We do not have that. And also, we cannot accurately forecast the demand just because of the influx thanks to the e-commerce. And now our 2 locations that we've selected are Birmingham and Toledo. And the reason is strictly in the numbers, as well as the proximity to our locations in the southeast. Looking at Birmingham, as you can see, we have a slightly cheaper price per square feet for our warehouse plant. And then we also have a cheaper diesel from compared to Atlanta. And while looking at Toledo, we notice that we have really cheap real estate. It's 0.6, at least 0.6 cheaper than the real estate would be if our operation was in Cincinnati. And when our warehouse of capacity of 100,000 square feet at that size, that's over $600,000 you're saving in a year. So that's our reasoning behind that. Also, it has a relatively cheap diesel. It's at, I believe, $3.07 per gallon. And then also, Toledo is a good option because of its proximity to Canada, and we're looking to take advantage of the potential of the woods market over there. Now I'm going to pass it up to Erin to...
Thank you. Okay, yes, so I'm going to get into kind of why we decided to choose to source a new, delivered to a new port. So obviously, we were getting materials in from Charleston port, but obviously with the congestion, we did want to look into opening a new port. So how we came across the decision to open up or to start sourcing from the Port of Virginia, just because of its location. It is further up the coast, just because hurricane season does fall within peak season. So kind of taking those risks into account as well, so we want to move it further up the coast. We did look into possibly moving a port to the west coast, but as far as when it came down to time, but it was shorter to get to the west coast, but then as far as railing it across the country, it just kind of ended up not really being cost-benefit analysis. We have that in the appendix as well if you'd like to take a look at that afterwards. And then as well as the Port of Virginia is growing very rapidly. So they currently operate with 270,000 TEUs per month. And they just, as of 2019, they started operating 4 more cranes. So they say by the end of 2019, they should be able to process 1 million more TEUs a year with that advancement. And then, so this is right from Sonar, so outbound tender rejects. This just shows as far as the capacity for the shipment. So as you can see, both ports are on a downward trend, which is awesome for us as far as the market goes, so that's good. So both ports seem to be pretty reliable as of to date. So, and then as far as our fleet outsourcing, so we are going to keep utilizing our fleet that we already have. We're assuming that we're operating at full capacity, and then as well as we will outsource. So we're gonna outsource to a different logistics provider from the port to our warehouses, and then from our warehouse, we're going to utilize our fleet that we already have to take the fleet from our warehouses then to our customers. And then as far as decentralization goes, we're going to keep our headquarters in Chattanooga, but we are going to decentralize some of the sourcing and operations roles out to our warehouses to be closer to the customers. And then I'm going to pass it off to Noe.
Thank you, Erin. All right, so now I'll move on to technological investment and efficiency. So I'm sure you're wondering, how are you going to be able to fulfill all our current demands and future demands with just 2 warehouses? For that, we have a 3-step plan. First, we start off with data collecting technology, such as RFID, GPS tracking. With that, we can collect useful data, such as demand, how long it takes for a truck to get from point A to B, but we'll also be able to use that data to implement other technologies such as automation. We want our warehouses to be powerhouses. We want them to be able to fulfill demand for all of our customers in all of our regions. So with that, we'll be implementing technology that will automate the processes and increase our operations. And then the third step, and the step that we believe will differentiate us from the rest of our competitors, is customer relationships. So we're selling to mom and pop stores, and we're selling high quality products. We believe that if we're able to connect with them and share data, we'll be able to avoid risks such as the bullwhip effect, which is very common in kind of the processes involved in this industry. And also with strong customer loyalty, we'll be able to forecast and have more constant demand throughout the year. With that, I'll pass it to Andres, who will wrap it up.
Thank you, Noe. So we firmly believe that adopting a flexible operation strategy is what will allow Ben Murphy and Daughters to succeed in the current context. And so the way we see this happening is by them doing three things. First, focusing on location, so where they're positioning their warehouses as well as where they're positioning their ports. The decision to outsource versus adopting the fixed costs of creating new warehouses right now, as well as investing in new technology. So long as they maintain a strategy that allows them to stay flexible in the incoming environment, they'll be able to succeed. And so this is basically a Gantt chart that illustrates how we believe that we can achieve this in a year. We looked up the duration, we estimated durations based off of statistics from the World Bank. So that being said, thank you all for listening, and we'll open up the floor for some Q&A.
Can you guys hear me? All right. So, first of all, great job, you guys. I know this isn't easy to be in front of a very large group of people you're competing against as well. So, good job. Really happy. I have a couple of questions. It seemed like your presentation you focused on eliminating Atlanta, and I'd love to know your thesis for why you would eliminate Atlanta. It seemed like it was a really important thing for you guys to consider. What was the purpose of that?
I think in the appendix, don't we have the cost of what to rent? No, it'll be in the appendix. Oh, I can't see it. Oh, that's you doing it. Okay. Okay, sorry, it's not showing up. Okay, basically, so we had a graph from Sonar. So basically, it would outline the price of the warehousing in Atlanta, and then Toledo, and then also in Birmingham. And then Atlanta was obviously going to be the highest, as well as just the congestion of just trucking in Atlanta as well. Trying to get in and out of the city is just it just is kind of just a big cost effect. And then we realized that also, by putting a warehouse in Birmingham, we could also service Tampa within 1 day by the trucking 11 hours, I guess, constraint. And so we just thought that it would save time. I mean, obviously, it's going to add a little bit depending on where you're going from, but we thought that using that money could be better utilized elsewhere.
And just to emphasize, the place that Atlanta couldn't reach was Dallas, which is the e-commerce that really does want that quick delivery.
Got it. So you're making it's really eliminating Atlanta is about serving Dallas, is my understanding?
Yes, yeah. And Texas is a growing industry, especially for what we're in, and so especially with the e-commerce too. So.
Okay, got it.
Texas as a whole.
And how did you inform your decision on Atlanta's congestion? How did you guys come up with that conclusion, other than driving it?
I don't know if, believe we have that. Maybe not. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to this, but just to add on to the previous answer, removing Atlanta was also about flexibility, and I'm not sure if this directly answers your question, so you can respond if it doesn't. It's also about flexibility in terms of long-term growth. We're growing also near the Washington, D.C. area. We have contracts there. And so for us to remain in Atlanta, but also grow in the southeast and a little bit of the northeast, it made more sense for us to move to Birmingham, but also move to Toledo. So I don't know if that directly answers your question, but feel free to.
And I don't want to hog it because I'll let these guys go in a second. But by eliminating Atlanta, you're going to increase your miles to serve the Georgia market, right? Where's your other warehouse in the state of Georgia? Do you have another one?
The other warehouse that we opened?
What were your warehouses? Remind me?
Birmingham, Alabama. So it'll be close to Georgia still. It's just slightly over to reach that Texas market more efficiently.
Got it. You got Ohio, but what your cost of serving Georgia and Florida is now higher, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Or the cost is to serve our Georgia market. It'll come from the Birmingham, Alabama warehouse.
Got it.
So, yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
And did
It
you
will
guys, just real quick, did you look at population centers of where your customers are or where the concentration of population is and how the impact of shutting down a warehouse, what that would do relative to your total cost?
So we did, for the first part of your question, we did look at where this industry was growing, and a lot of it is in Texas, and if anyone else could remember the other two.
Also, as far as like we looked up, as far as where the housing market is going, obviously just because we are sourcing materials that could go into houses and whatnot, and so we looked into kind of the housing markets that are booming right now, and I know Austin was one, and then there was Boston was another one, so obviously moving that up towards the Northeast as well.
And,
All right.
sorry, just to quickly answer the second part of your question, we didn't look at a direct analysis of selling the Georgia or Atlanta plants or warehouse, but we just assumed that would sell due to the market, the area.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I'm into team dynamics. So you guys just formed this team about 24 hours ago, is that right? What's been the biggest hurdle you guys have overcome in the last 24 hours?
We could all talk about it. So.
Maybe I'll start. I think it's reaching a consensus with 7 people. We had 7 people, now we have 6. But reaching a consensus on what the path is for specific decisions. Should we focus on flexibility? Should we eliminate Atlanta? And where should those new warehouses be? How do we make those decisions? Who has the stronger data? All that type of stuff. It was tough to reach a consensus on. We didn't get much sleep because of it. So yeah, that's for me.
But I think in the end, what I liked about this group was that we were able to work on our strengths, let people who knew what they were doing do that work. And so in the end, we were able to come to a cohesive solution, and it worked out, I think.
Can you explain a little bit more the Ohio warehouse? I guess I didn't quite understand that one.
Yeah, we're looking at the warehouse to be located in Toledo, Ohio, to be more specific. We had considered expanding somewhere to the warehouse somewhere in the north just to satisfy the demand in Youngstown, Ohio, as well as the e-commerce, the spike in demand due to e-commerce. We figured there's going to be a couple of demand retailers in the northeast demanding our wood and stone, and so we selected Toledo just because, first of all, it's like one of the cheapest cities when it comes to rent. We're looking at the data, we compared all the cities in the southeast to all the way to the northeast even, and we noticed that Toledo was just much cheaper than everything else, and about $600,000. It's actually about $730,000 you'll save in a year because the difference.
Oh, and we noticed that it's just a hub. There's multiple different major highways that go through there, as well as freight, so rail goes through there. I'm not brushed up on my rail names. I think it's CSX and then NS are the 2 rails that service that area, and they had a ton of different lines that went through there. And it went, because we were originally looking at the West Port versus East Ports, and both of those ports serviced via those railways as well, so that was another. We knew that would be easily accessed.
And so when you switch the warehouses, have you considered the lane cost from your new warehouse to your customers' locations versus what the Atlanta to the customer locations were? Was that part of your analysis as well? And can you, if it was, can you just What was the
From-
math like?
like transportation costs from Atlanta to the customers versus,
Correct.
okay. I mean,
So the way, we didn't really do much analysis other than kind of looking at cost per square foot, stuff like that. But the way we approached this problem was not totally in cost, but more in kind of reliability and being able to fulfill that demand for the customers. We're selling kind of high-end wood it's from China, but we're selling high-end wood that we kind of assume would have a higher margin. And what we want is for our customers to be happy and to have that product with them.
In addition, something we really liked was that the markets in Pennsylvania and in the Northeast are growing at a significant rate. In 2017, they were some of the fastest growing markets, so having a distribution center out there is going to be amazing because we're trying to basically help serve commercial contractors and residential builders, right? And so that's where their demand is going to be as well. So we're going to expect to be there in order to help supplement them. In addition, what's nice about having a distribution center up there in the north is that it's close to Canada. So if in the future we decide to actually source from Canada, we can get rid of those 29 days from China and just like work with that. So it's not like it's just like a long-term like fantasy that we like to consider. Yeah.
So I have two questions. Number one, I think you touched on it a little bit. What was your thinking around choosing Virginia as opposed to a West Coast port?
Oh, we have stuff on that.
okay, so we have two different things. So basically, what this chart is showing us is that the green is going to be the cost per TEU shipping into the East Coast ports, and then blue is going to be versus West Coast ports. So obviously, it is cheaper to ship to West Coast, and then it obviously is going to get there. Not obviously, but does get there faster as far as freight, as far as shipping. And then so we made this graph as well, and this kind of shows the numbers. So Shanghai to Long Beach, and then from Long Beach shipped by rail to either Birmingham or Toledo. Those were the costs we came up with as far as the price for the rail. We kind of average, it's about $6,000 during peak season, $2,000 during not, so we kind of came up with about $3,000 for that, and then time, and it's about equidistance from Long Beach to both of those locations, so about 14 days each. And so we kind of came up with totals, and so basically, as you can see, is we saved a couple days, but we weren't, I guess, saving a ton of money, and so we just kind of stuck with, obviously, just being closer to the ports, having less touches. We don't have to ship it all the way across the country on rail, and things like that.
Good. And then my second question is, what do you see as the biggest risk to executing the strategy that you've laid out?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
What do you see as the biggest risk to executing the strategy that you've laid out? Is it political risk, or there cost inflation or spikes that you see as potential risk? What do you see?
Yeah, I think the biggest risk is we've focused on a long-term approach. We've said and the case mentioned that considering 5 warehouses, we only chose 2. We're moving ports, so we focus on the long term rather than the short term. So the risk with that is, will we be able to fulfill short-term demand, remain operational to customer needs? And so that is the risk, but we're willing to take that on, considering the long-term approach and kind of the uncertainty of the market going forward, so that we remain opportunistic with investment opportunities later down the line.
Very good. Thank you.
So I don't know how much time we have. I have one last question from my side. I think it's really interesting. You guys guys and girls brought up the point of outsourcing, and I think you mentioned to your warehouse you would outsource, and then basically to your customer part you will keep your own fleets. I would like a little bit more detail as to why that's the case, because that, depending on who you choose, would go your favor in terms of risk analytics. But could you delve a little bit deeper into that?
So yeah, I guess as far as outsourcing it, so we did just want to keep our fleet. We didn't want to keep it going back and forth. We wanted to just service our customers, as well as then kind of mentioned we couldn't utilize that rail, because obviously we don't have rail, but if we were to go to a different transportation company, they'd be able to obviously set that up for us, so we could utilize that rail. And then, I don't know, what was the last part of your question? Is that, okay, is that everyone?
I have a little bit more on that. Could we go to the last slide?
The last of the appendix, or?
The last of the appendix, yeah. So in our strategy, we were considering going into either vertical integration, so purchasing a warehouse versus like outsourcing the cost. And so the reason we decided to go into vertical integration is because we were willing to take on the variable costs of outsourcing, because that would allow us to be more flexible in the future. We think it's better for us to take on those fixed costs in the future once we can actually invest in autonomous vehicles and stuff that's going to actually help us scale in the future. So if we try to scale now, we're actually limiting what we're, our potential. But that being said, we are actually giving up, like we are making some sacrifices in order for that to happen. One of them is we're sacrificing economies of scale now, and we are making a bet through our analysis. But we're able to start optimizing our technology right now, so we can focus all of our efforts there, rather than just like paying the cost to upkeep a warehouse or a port. And so, yeah, and in addition to that, we're also like relinquishing a little bit of the control that we could have if we owned these facilities, but we're also eliminating some of the risks because the people that we're outsourcing to take on the risks of insurance premiums and stuff like that. So,
Thank you. That was a great answer.
yeah. Thank you guys. Okay.